Well, the first book is Avalo, which is a modern existentialist novel, and it's about force of youth being portrayed as a force with no control and unlimited energy, and having bits of itself chipped off as it shoots forward and becomes something else entirely, which you don't even know about until the end of the novel. In fact, even the end of the novel leaves that result quite vague. So it's basically like the 13th chapter in an entire story just presented by itself as one novel. The Force of Youth, I think, is self-referential, but it also applies to pretty much everybody. Because everyone's been young at some point, and everyone isn't young after a certain point. And they go through a certain maturity process that life tweaks and dictates along the way. And the result of how they mature through a process of whittling, like a process of being honed down, has to do to a certain extent with the experiences that they had, and to a greater extent with how they reacted to it. Truth and fiction does blend. I do blend them quite well, simply because I can't ever really write a completely true story for some reason. For the second book, Dreams, Visions, and Fragments, which came out earlier on this year, I'd have to say that there's less truthful element in it. Less autobiographical element in it than there is fictional. The second book and the first book are available on Amazon. They're also available locally in Cyprus in all the major bookstores, but we're actually almost sold out on both counts. So their best bet would have to be Amazon so far. Both books have received a lot of critique in print and also in person. And the critique is actually quite diverse, because I get a lot of people who love both books. I get a lot of people who find that the first book is too challenging to read, which in a sense is true. The first one is more challenging in the sense that it's more wordy, it's much more complex, it's very fast-paced. And that kind of creates a sense of overstimulation, which can be quite hard to keep up with. But the fact that I did it that way was intentional, because that force of youth that has boundless energy and no control actually is sort of a sensory overload in itself, because when you're growing up, you're just taking in so much and experiencing so much and so many different things at such a fast pace that it can be very overwhelming, and that's the effect that I wanted it to have. I have termed myself a precision writer because I'm very, very particular about what I write, and every word counts. Having said that, I don't really I don't overplan, because I find that doesn't allow the work to breathe. The story Clone, which is the last story in Dreams, Visions, and Fragments, which has been largely hailed as the best story in the collection, which I agree with, did have a lot of research involved, because I felt that it had to be as realistic as possible. I had to write about a seemingly unrealistic scenario in as realistic a way as possible. So in order to do that, you have to keep it tight, regimented, and very well researched. The third book, which I'm writing now, which is actually the fastest I've ever written, I'm almost done and I'm only 4 months into writing it, White City, is the third book and the second novel. And it's what I would call, if you try and coin it, it would have to be like a pornographic political satire. It's loosely based on Cyprus, but I want to present it as a fictional land, and I haven't called it Cyprus or anything like that. But it's basically set in the year 2035, even though it is not a futuristic novel. And I want to, I guess the simplest way to describe it would be an industrial and political version of 100 Years of Solitude, with a lot of pornography in it. The main character is Russian, and he's a deserter from Afghanistan, because in the book Russia is invading Afghanistan again, like it did in the late 70s. And yeah, the protagonist is a Russian soldier, a medic, who runs away from the war and comes to this island simply to get away from all of that. And that's where the story begins. That the story actually begins in the middle of a sex scene as he's on a ship coming to the island. I can't really say everything about how the character transforms throughout the novel, because there are many stages. Although I will say mutation is a strong theme in this book, not just for the protagonist, but for many other characters. I've seen big changes from the first book to the second book, and from the second book to the third book, in terms of the way I write. And the first book is a very overambitious and overzealous, archetypal, ranty kind of novel, which complements the theme of it, because youth is overambitious and overzealous. The second one is a lot more controlled and a lot calmer, a lot dreamier, which I believe also complements it, because it does deal with the conscious and subconscious mind. The third book that I'm writing now is, despite being the most pornographic and the most provocative and the most seemingly inappropriate book, is actually the one that I think would be more commercially acceptable in terms of the style, because it's very easily readable, even though the content itself is pretty outrageous. Because the language has become very simple, but the speed has picked up again. It's become very fast again. White City is a very, I mean, even though it's a very hedonistic book, it's very clearly defined, whereas Avalo is like free jazz, like it's just all over the place. I prefer personally having a confrontational attitude and a more aggressive attitude as opposed to the pitiful one, because I think that's how you come to discover things. I mean, you move forward and you might make huge mistakes along the way, and you most probably will. And you'll suffer because of those mistakes, but at the same time you won't sort of wallow in your self-pity and your misery and stagnate, and you just keep going forward as much as you can in whatever condition you're in, however damaged the last fuck up left you. You just keep going forward, and don't stop moving. I like all forms of criticism, and unfavorable criticism is no different, because I'm a publicity whore, basically, or at least I'm becoming one. And if it's any form of critique, I don't mind, because it means that people are paying attention to the books, and they have every right to think whatever they think. That's their right, and that's their prerogative. I mean, anything after that just bears discussion, and there's nothing wrong with discussion. Yeah, I think it is a strong point that the work initiates discussion, because what's the point of writing a book if you're not gonna provoke people and have them see things in a different light, or at least entertain the possibility of seeing things in a different light through their own arguments, or their agreements or disagreements in regards to the material. Anyone who would meet me after having read my books would know me implicitly in a way that they wouldn't have known me after having talked to me, because I'm actually far more revealing in my books about myself than I am in person. So I think that anyone who read the books would be aware of a bigger dimension in regards to how they see me, as opposed to if they've just talked to me. Well, to all the potential readers out there, I'd say there's something different in every book, because I like to tackle a very different project every time I start a book. A different theme, different style, whilst at the same time maintaining my own persona. And I can easily imagine the first book being attractive to the young intellectual heavyweights in your group of friends. The second one is a little more spiritual and cerebral, yet has some sort of a dark element to it as well, in terms of phallic restraint and release, and explorations between the conscious and subconscious minds through parallels of surrealism and realism. Whereas the third book, whilst written like a crowd pleaser, has content that is highly, highly controversial, and it's not out yet, so I don't know how people are going to react to it, but everyone likes sex, right?